All right, let's talk about an economic system that wasn't just about spreadsheets and numbers. It was a high-stakes global game, played by empires for centuries, with a set of rules that literally redrew the map of the world. Welcome to mercantilism. So, I want you to imagine something. What if all the wealth in the entire world was just one big pie, a fixed pie? If you wanted a bigger slice for yourself, you couldn't just bake more pie. No, you had to take your slice from someone else. This one simple, brutally competitive idea, well, that was the engine that drove the great powers of Europe for hundreds of years. Okay, so let's really dig into this core belief, this idea that the world is a pie. The whole system, everything we're about to talk about, was built on this foundation. It wasn't about creating new wealth. It was about grabbing the biggest piece of the wealth that already existed. You got to understand this zero-sum mindset because it is the absolute key to unlocking this entire era. This quote right here, it just nails it. It basically frames all of international relations as one giant battle. Every trade deal, every tariff, every shipment was an act of either aggression or defense. See, trade wasn't about, mutual benefit. It was about winning. If France got a little bit richer, then England believed that it was, by definition, getting poorer. This kind of thinking, well, it fueled these intense and often really violent national rivalries, like the Anglo-Dutch Wars, which were fought almost entirely over who got to control the most profitable trade routes. And so, to win this game, every nation needed a playbook, and that playbook was called mercantilism. The goal was super simple. Get your hands on as much gold and silver as you possibly can. And in this game, the government wasn't just some neutral referee on the sidelines. Oh no. The government was the coach, the star player, and the team owner all rolled into one, controlling every single move to make sure the nation came out on top. So if this is a game, you gotta have a game plan, right? What were the rules? How did a nation actually win at this thing? Well, the strategy was actually pretty straightforward, and it all boiled down to one single central idea. And here it is. This is the core tactic. It was all about having a favorable balance of trade. And that's just a fancy way of saying you had to sell more stuff to other countries than you bought from them. It's simple, right? Every single export was a winning move. It brought gold and silver into your country. And every import, that was a losing move. It sent your precious gold and silver out to your rivals. Now, to make sure everybody on, say, Team England or Team France followed the game plan, the state was the coach. This was what we'd call a command economy. The government told people what to make, who they were allowed to sell it to, and even which ships to use. Every single economic decision was made to bring victory and wealth to the crown. Okay, but wait, there's a problem here. To keep exporting valuable goods, you need a constant supply of cheap raw materials to make them, and you need people who are guaranteed to buy your stuff. So where do you get them? Well, for that, the European powers had an ace up their sleeve, their colonies. Colonies were the secret weapon, the engines that made this whole game actually work. You see, colonies had two absolutely critical jobs in this system. First, they were a source of cheap raw materials. Think timber from North America, sugar from the Caribbean. This meant the mother country didn't have to buy these things from its rivals. And second, they were a captive market. They were legally forced to buy manufactured goods only from the mother country. It created this perfect, totally rigged, closed loop of wealth. The British Navigation Acts are just the perfect example of this in action. Britain passed laws saying that all goods from its colonies had to be shipped on British ships. This was a genius move because it completely cut out their main shipping rivals, the Dutch, and it guaranteed that all the profits from the shipping industry stayed inside the British Empire. It was a masterful play in the game, and as you might guess, it was also one of the big reasons the American colonists started getting really, really angry a little later on. That colonial engine was incredibly powerful, incredibly profitable, but it didn't run on timber and sugar alone. It ran on human lives. And this is where the whole story takes a very, very dark turn. Just think about it for a second. To run these huge sugar plantations, tobacco farms, you need a massive, constant, and cheap labor force. And after diseases brought by Europeans wiped out huge numbers of the indigenous populations, the system had to look somewhere else to find those workers. The question was, where? The answer was the transatlantic slave trade. It created this brutal but hugely profitable network that we call the triangular trade. Here's how it worked. European ships would take manufactured goods, like guns and cloth, to Africa. There, they would trade those goods for enslaved African people. Then came the horrific Middle Passage, transporting those people across the Atlantic to the Americas. And finally, the ships would load up with the raw materials produced by their forced labor, sugar, tobacco, cotton, and take it all back to Europe to start the cycle all over again. And let's be crystal clear about what this means. Within this economic system, human beings were literally turned into commodities. They were items on a ledger, just like barrels of rum or bundles of cotton. They were packed onto ships and transported across the ocean in the most brutal, dehumanizing conditions imaginable, all to fuel that colonial engine and keep the gold flowing in the right direction. The profits from this whole system were just astronomical. And they didn't just make kings and queens rich. All of these goods, produced by enslaved labor, flowed back into Europe and completely reshaped society in ways that, frankly, nobody saw coming. I mean, this trade really changed daily life for everyone. You can see it here. You've got New World crops like corn and potatoes causing Europe's population to literally explode. And at the same time, you have things like sugar and coffee, which used to be these insane luxuries only for the super rich, suddenly becoming everyday items for a brand new middle class. This wasn't just a few new products. This was a consumer revolution. And this revolution, it created totally new ways of living. Coffee houses, for example, popped up all over and became these hubs for business and new ideas. All this new demand for goods fueled the growth of a powerful new merchant class. And you needed new ways to finance and protect all this global trade, right? So this is where modern banking and insurance really get their start. So when you look at the big picture, the mercantilist era, with all of its competition and all of its brutality, it actually built the launchpad for the modern world. The huge amounts of capital, the global trade routes, this new hunger for consumer goods, it all created the perfect storm, the perfect conditions for the Industrial Revolution that was just around the corner. And that kind of brings us to a final question to chew on. Mercantilism was built on that idea of a fixed pie, that zero-sum game where one country has to lose for another to win. Now, we like to think we've moved past that, but have we? When you look at modern trade wars and rising economic nationalism, you have to ask yourself, how much of that old zero-sum thinking is still with us today?